Well, thank you, Michael. Ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be with you. Many colleagues in the room today and former colleagues. I notice Michael Gwenda and Steve Harris over there. I'm under their watchful eye. They remind me of those two guys in the Muppets in the gallery there, ready to provide the ongoing commentary. I note also that APAC is filming today. They called and asked if I minded if APAC would film it. I said, as I've said in the past, I'm happy for that to happen. Any contribution I can make so there's less New Zealand Parliament on Australian television. I'm happy to oblige. It's great to be with you at the Melbourne Press Club. There's no similar institution in Sydney. In fact, the closest place Sydney could come up with an institution like this is the old Journos Club up near Central Station. And I was last there many years ago. And in my recollection of the place, it was replete with poker machines, beer stains from the ages and the smell of half a century's tobacco smoke. And the extent of debate there on the profession consisted of old down-table subs from a long-defunct Afternoon Sun newspaper reminiscing about how their duties included writing horoscope columns under mystical astrological nom de plumes. The debate about the journalistic future at Journos Club was simple and perennial. It's stuffed, or words to that effect. And the kind of sophisticated analysis was always suggesting at the Journos Club that the trouble with these times is that the future isn't what it used to be. But Melbourne takes journalism seriously. From this club to the Quills, to the Graham Perkin Award and the A.N. Smith Lecture, to regular debates and discussion around the media on John Fane and Neil Mitchell, to the serious aspirations and the great heritages of The Age and the Herald Sun, to the continued thoughtful contributions by people like Eric Beecher and Michael Gwenda and the perennial peripatetic Stephen Mayne. So it's good to be able to join you today to talk a little bit about where the ABC is heading during these heady and tumultuous days for the journalistic profession. Recently, someone pointed out to me that a lot of the talk about journalism last year concerned itself with the business model supporting it. And a lot of people spoke about technology and various gadgets and gizmos and innovations that will support how we tell these stories. And I should know because I was one of those people. But fewer people talked about what we should be expecting from quality journalism, or questioned the nature of the content itself, not just the means of delivery. Yet there are good reasons to focus on technology over content. Anyone looking at the music business or the newspaper business over the past decade would see that we cannot separate out considerations about content from those of technology. Technology is always determining the fate of content. What we do depends on how we do it, and that means eternally adapting to technological change and the behavioural change that technology brings. But since we're in a new year and a new decade, it seems right to begin 2010 at your first meeting of this year by asking some different kinds of questions for the decade ahead. How do we create and sustain a culture of journalism, breaking and reporting news for the digital era? The ABC has a formidable culture in news and current affairs. But what does the public broadcaster have to do to develop this culture in the digital age? What part of our culture from the past do we need to leave behind in order to be successful in the future? What's the best contribution we can make? And what standards, quality and changes are now required to meet public demand? As you know, the ABC has many decades of rich experience in news and current affairs. Last year, PM was 40. Next year, Four Corners turns 50. And in 2 days' time, we'll mark the 20th anniversary of Lateline, a program that's now stronger than ever. In fact, Lateline offers us a textbook case of how the ABC carved out a place for itself in the future. How in the case of Lateline, tradition met innovation and the audience won. There were many challenges in creating the program, but two of them are permanent challenges. How could the ABC take up the advantages that new technology presented, in this case satellite technology, and what was in it for the audience? How could we keep up with the behavioural change that was taking place at the time? when more and more people were getting home from work late and in front of the television later at night? How could we offer substantive current affairs programming at a time that suited the audience and take advantage of that later time slot? Well, new satellite technology paved the way for Lateline. It enabled them to pioneer the live international cross, suddenly talking to Washington and talking to London in time zones that both worked for the talent and worked for our audiences. It suddenly became possible. Yet, as you might remember, live satellite use was expensive, and it was crude, and it was subject to failure, and it was risky. And setting up and lining up the guests depended not only just on new technology, but that sexy old technology we remember, like the telex machine, the fax machine, or the rarest thing of all at the ABC in that time, a telephone with access to international subscriber dialing. So, yes, it was risky, but the risks were worth taking, and they resulted in a new program and better national and international coverage for our audiences. And in those early years, there are perhaps two examples that prove the risk that Lateline took were worth it. In the early hours of the 2nd of August 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. And hours later, Kerry O'Brien was able to cross live to Washington and London and Cairo, not to break the story, but to present an analysis on its implications. And later in 1991, when the August coup attempt against the Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev took place, Lateline was again able to provide leadership of that coverage. They had been following the developments in the Soviet Union for some months. They had built up a team of contacts in Moscow. And then now they were able to go on air and put Australians in touch with people right there on the scene to give a live, immediate sense of what was happening and a perspective on these events. The Lateline experiment proved that if we build it and we do it right, people will come. And just as we've seen most recently with ABC News Breakfast, audiences will come, and the audiences for News Breakfast have doubled in the space of a year. Joe and Virginia are here today. They'll be nodding off shortly. But I want to thank them for the work they've done and the News Breakfast team for bringing something new to Australian television. Now that show in the same time slot has much the same reach as Sky News. And I expect that the audience for News Breakfast will continue to grow as digital rollout makes it more available across the country. I've said in my time at the ABC and prior to that I admire the achievements of Sky. And ABC News Breakfast was not created to drive Sky News out of business. If that happens, nobody wins. But we have added to audience choices. If they have pay TV, and we've added something distinctive for all audiences, whether they subscribe to pay TV or not. And there's no doubt that we can see from the audiences and from our research that Australian news lovers appreciate the fresh approach, the diversity that the ABC has brought to breakfast television news. Our shareholders, the Australian people, also appreciate that while they'd had a good return on their investment in the ABC, ABC News Breakfast has enlarged that return. And these are the models for innovation that have changed the game for ABC journalism and given us a glimpse of the future. And we can draw on our experiences of them as we now examine how we're going to boost the ABC's journalism in the coming decade. When considering the future of ABC journalism, our thinking is that any technological process comes with a cultural objective attached. We will do more journalism, yes, but we will do it well. And I want to put paid to the view and the fear, not just of our competitors, but by some people have the greatest regard for ABC journalism, that the ABC will only be able to offer more journalism by diluting what we already offer now. That we'll spread ourselves too thin. That's the fear. And by spreading ourselves too thin, we'll damage the ABC's reputation. On the contrary, we see making this technological shift as an opportunity to enrich and reinvigorate our journalism at the same time. And these are not mutually exclusive aims. As you know, the ABC this year will launch a free-to-air 24-hour news channel. And this new channel will leverage off our existing investment in local, national, regional and international journalism. And we've made savings to fund the channel through changing our production processes and using new technologies, which we are reinvesting in journalism and program making. Technology changes audience expectations, and digital television allows us to create a news service for those members of our audience who want continuous access to news, and they want coverage of breaking news as it happens. If the ABC is not there, particularly when the story is big, constantly changing and of real consequence, we cannot be the news leader that we should be. We have already developed a respected and credible continuous news service through news radio, and now we can do the same on television as well. An ABC News Breakfast has been a deliberate development exercise for us, drawing on the vast resources of ABC News, including our radio teams around the country, to deliver live, intelligent and engaging breakfast television news. We have developed the technological and journalistic capabilities for going live on television for extended periods of time that we would have once struggled with. And along with the expansion of our online news sites, we've been forced to develop new newsroom protocols to deliver the stories to more pressing deadlines than the top of the hour or 7 p.m. Clearly, in this new media landscape, the news is not waiting for us. Our challenge with this immediacy is to be fast, but to be accurate and to be certain, to deliver in a new way the best of our long-established standards. Under our charter, we're to be an informative broadcaster, and we're to be an innovative broadcaster, and we're to inform the Australian people. And by launching the new channel later this year, we will continue to deliver on both those charter goals. And of course, we won't be the only channel offering a 24-hour news service. Pay TV has channels from Australia and around the world. But since more than 2/3 of Australian homes do not have pay TV, the vast majority of those homes do not see any news channels. A free-to-air channel from the ABC offers access to the nation. For the majority, it'll represent their only 24-hour news channel. For everyone, it will represent distinctive content. When radio and television were being established in Australia, the nation itself was still being made. Our policymakers, they looked around the world for the model of broadcasting that might work best here. They didn't emulate the British model, with the public broadcaster, the BBC, effectively established as a monopoly. They didn't model the American system either, where broadcasting was dominated by commercial interests. They went in Australia for the mixed model, in the belief that it delivers the greatest possible benefit. For more than 50 years now, we've delivered an ABC television news service alongside the offerings from the commercial networks, the mixed media model at work. And the new ABC News channel follows that precedent. We think it's a news service that will be different beyond access, and it will be all the better because we're not the only ones providing a 24-hour news service in an Australian context. Competition will make us sharper. Competition will make Sky News sharper. At the ABC, we don't aspire to be a monopoly provider of anything. Our charter calls us to be innovative and comprehensive whilst being mindful of what is on offer from other broadcasters. And I think we can demonstrate that we are focusing our resources and our activity around those areas where we feel that we're already in a great position, given our history, our culture, our reputation and our current investment to provide an excellent service. We're doing that in children's television on ABC3, and we'll be working hard to do it with 24-hour news. And we'll do it in 24-hour news with more reporters locally, nationally and internationally, newsrooms in 60 locations around the country and 12 international bureaus. You add all this up, and the question isn't why would the ABC provide a 24/7 news channel, but why wouldn't we? There is, and will rightly continue to be, a debate around the role of public broadcasters in the media landscape. And my view on this was elegantly summarised by Alan Rusbridger, the editor of The Guardian, in his Cudlip lecture last month. Rusbridger stated that it would be utterly wrong
to hobble the one model that is able to successfully produce distinguished and serious journalism, publicly funded broadcasters, in order to sustain a failed business model. And he points out that with no public service broadcaster to speak of in the United States, newspapers there are still in terrible trouble. But assuming continued public and political support, there will be a legitimate public expectation that the ABC delivers what we admit and understand we are in a privileged position to deliver: journalism that challenges and confronts and that engages audiences in a compelling way. That the ABC will be able to cut through the noise and the clutter to bring news of substance and moment and to give the important stories the attention that they deserve. We will be successful in the long term, not just by vigorously embracing new platforms or experimenting with new technology, though we must continue to do both. What will really make us different and valued and sustain our journalism into the future is a working culture that drives the breaking of news and the telling of stories. And I want to talk now just a little bit about what we're doing in our newsrooms to sustain and allow that culture to flourish. Let me talk about standards. I wonder sometimes if the instant metrics generated in the online world are increasing the temptation to be tabloid in choosing news and pictures and headlines to draw eyeballs and click-through, just as a tabloid newspaper editor rightly designs page one to drive response from the newsstand. There's nothing wrong with tabloids, I hasten to add, nodding in the direction of colleagues from the Herald Sun. But in the great newspaper markets around the world, in New York and London, in Melbourne, in Sydney, we've often had tabloids and broadsheets operating side by side, offering different content to different segments of the market. They express the news differently in different ways. In the online space, however, that distinction has tended to blur. Tabloids and broadsheets tend to behave the same way, as if the online audience's primary aim is to be entertained. The result is a kind of editorial thinking that means we get far more coverage, as has been noted, far more coverage of Paris Hilton than Paris, France. More Angelina and Brad than Angola and Chad. But clearly, even in an era of unprecedented media plenty, there will be a prized place for news organisations, the New York Times, The Economist, the BBC, for example. News organisations that can be trusted and believed, who believe in terms of news values, who don't just trade the trust to juice the ratings or the traffic numbers through simple sugar hits of sensationalism, whose online brand mirrors that of their impressive legacy brands in print or broadcasting. That's the position the ABC must be in. Our news operation may be on different platforms, but the same editorial values will apply wherever we are in the new media space. We're going to places that were once deemed unimaginable. There's a Four Corners Facebook page, for goodness sake. But in using new technology and reaching new audiences, we must do nothing that undermines the trust of the Australian people in the ABC, nothing that undermines the integrity and independence of our news services. We take our standards seriously today, and we're thinking through how we must hold them high, delivering to new audiences using new tools of journalism and storytelling. We are independently auditing for adherence to editorial standards. We are consulting with major international organisations around our methodology, and we're making our methodology available to others to use if they wish. We have the country's most comprehensive system for mapping and reviewing audience feedback on programming. Our programs are subject to rigorous internal reviews. Over the years, there's been significant focus on the ABC's editorial standards and policies. The guidebook of the Ed Polls, as the ABC colleagues here would know, it's lengthy and detailed. And I launched the most recent edition shortly after I started at the ABC in 2006. But we're now reworking these policies, and I believe that it is very difficult in this era to codify and develop rules for every situation and circumstance a broadcaster or journalist may face. I think now less may be more. It's less about having a rule book and more about having a genuine shared belief across the organisation, a commitment to journalism and integrity and respect for honesty and transparency, an adherence based on achieving journalism to the highest quality, a commitment to the highest values. We're always asking, how can we do things better? And it's clear that particularly in this age of continuous news, where relevant changing information turns up, we need to respond very quickly and also to very promptly correct errors. Our editorial policies will be briefer, but they'll be underpinned by guidance notes. To give genuine support to our program makers and editorial leaders, the notes will reflect how these policies have operated in practice. We want a culture that's not simply about staying within the rules, but about doing the best broadcasting, the highest quality practice of journalism. This is less about limits, it's more about aspirations. And we're about creating the support and environment that will allow such a culture to flourish. Investment in training and development is a feature of high-performing organisations. And at the ABC at the moment, a lot of our focus of training is on new cadets or on implementation of new technology. I suspect we have to have a greater focus on the crafts and skills our journalists and broadcasters need every day, to be constantly providing feedback, examples of best practice, an honest, ongoing conversation around standards and performance, and all of this applied more consistently around the country. And we're going to more systematically use the expertise we have inside the ABC, that huge, incredible asset of journalistic experience and talent, to mentor and develop our people. It will involve everyone and be a priority in the years ahead and be part of the ABC culture, and it will help ABC journalism stand out and be distinctive in this era of media plenty. I'm delighted that the ABC has won some recognition for our innovation in previous years, but in news we continue to wrestle and work out the impact of this new technology on our journalistic practices. We are embracing social networking and finding it a great way to stay connected with our audiences through the day. And through Twitter we can deliver fast-breaking news around everything from bushfires to leadership spills to traffic incidents and sports results. And we have new guidelines for the use of social networking that are simple and straightforward. But we're encouraging ABC people to use the new tools, but not in a cavalier or reckless way. When ABC News sends a message on Twitter, that message travels with the brand and the reputation of the ABC behind it. And it's the same when a senior journalist whose followers are made up of people who are drawn to them by the reputation of the ABC, it's the same when they send a message as well. We saw what a special role Twitter could play during the Liberal Party leadership eruption late last year. Through Twitter, those following the compelling drama gained insights into what was happening in the press gallery corridors, sweeping rumours, conflicting claims, disputed versions of facts. What it meant for us is that while we had the opportunity to use Twitter to explain what was happening, we had to avoid the trap of allowing its inherent pressure, that frenzied immediacy, where a minute late inside Twitter is like an hour late outside it. We had to avoid the trap of running unconfirmed stories as though they were somehow verified and to somehow lower our reporting standards. There is a place for reporting corridor chatter and speculation, but it always needs to be appropriately labelled as nothing more than that. By being rigorous, by checking and rechecking, by getting the story right on all our platforms, we are preserving our position of trust and value. Others may be louder, others may be flashier, others may be first, but we must get it right to the very best of our ability if ours is a voice that is going to be heard and trusted. This new era calls for flexibility from many of our journalists, flexibility our newsrooms have already embraced, and many of our reporters during their working day will file for online and radio and perhaps talk to a local radio announcer, as well as deliver a version of the story for television. And journalists at newspapers and other media organisations are facing similar demands. Yet while we need to be fast, and while we need to be versatile to meet the modern audience demands for immediacy, it's imperative that we continue to invest serious news resources in long-form news and current affairs, to take investigative journalism seriously into the next decade. Not everyone can be an investigative reporter, but we need as an organisation to be able to undertake major investigations, to break stories and to help set the news agenda. I recently read a suggestion that the ABC doesn't break stories. In fact, Margaret Simons asked us to provide us with a list of stories we have broken. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and read a list for Margaret, but if I was to read a list, Margaret, it may include some of these things. Sarah Ferguson's Four Corners report on the scandalous culture of rugby league, and Four Corners' revelations of the deep level of climate scepticism on the Liberal front bench, setting on course a path to the fall of Malcolm Turnbull as leader. And when the Godwin Gretsch story was unfolding, it was the ABC News that revealed that Gretsch's home was being raided by the AFP. Australian Story constantly brings you stories that you cannot see anywhere else, like the behind-the-scenes reporting on the kidnapping of Nigel Brennan in Somalia. Numerous stories were broken by Greg Borschmann from Radio National at the Climate Change Summit in Copenhagen. And here in Victoria, Stateline first raised the issue of the rising number of attacks on people from the Indian community and corruption in the Brimbank Council. Bendigo Newsroom broke the story of potential job losses in Maryborough if the Productivity Commission's recommendations on book importing were accepted. And last month, the Asia Pacific News Centre, based here in Melbourne, revealed the extent of tensions between Cambodia and Thailand and Cambodia's military build-up on the border. Margaret, the list was so much longer, but the time is running and that's all I can say. But let me simply say that every day our radio current affairs programs like AM and PM and The World Today are breaking stories, as are our local radio stations around the country. And of course I accept that we're not the only media organisation breaking stories. And I accept that the ABC, in common with many other media organisations, at times has shown poor form in not acknowledging and crediting stories broken elsewhere. At times I think the Australian media is too small-minded and lacks generosity of spirit. We can do better, all of us. We should, wherever possible, credit the genuine scoop, acknowledge whoever it was and whatever organisation they worked for who broke the story. Good investigative journalism takes time and it takes resources and it takes courage, and at the ABC we have all three. And we have a responsibility to deliver investigative journalism along with a commitment to it. We all know that the biggest stories often break in multiple iterations and that the truth only slowly becomes clear over time. And in the newspapers that I worked for, it was often the journalists who broke the original story who had the courage of continuing to break that stories and follow it through. But at times I think at the ABC, due to our own structures and territorialities and histories, our newsrooms have not followed up assiduously the stories broken by our current affairs programs as assiduously as they should have. And our news reporters have often not who have taken carriage of the story have often not had the understanding, the context or the brief to do so. And there have been times when those putting out an ABC News bulletin have only become aware of a major story being broken on an ABC current affairs show when it went to air, putting the ABC newsroom at no advantage to any other newsroom in the country. Now, none of this is best practice, and these are all things that we need to leave behind. And we're at work on correcting this. We've already been addressing it in a dedicated manner by establishing a new ABC News online investigative unit led by Suzanne Smith, who did such great work for Lateline, exposing problems in remote Indigenous communities. And this unit will provide support for our journalists no matter where they're working in pulling together investigative stories. That support might take place in terms of research or data analysis or simply acting as a sounding board to make sure that we're on the right approach. And when a story is broken, the unit may have a role in helping to ensure that there's the right follow-up to ensure momentum around the story in our radio and television bulletins, online and through our current affairs programs. And last year, this unit broke the story of the collapse of the Southern Bluefin tuna stock, a story that went out on ABC News online and then in reports on radio and television and then through current affairs, and it was picked up by news organisations around the country and around the world. And there's a new multimedia special that's being developed by that unit in collaboration with Lateline that you'll see in coming weeks. Of course, the amount of information available now, the public records, the documents, the personal information, that's a great boom for investigative reporters. You can make an argument if the time is there, it's never been a better time to be an investigative reporter. And we need to make sure that the tools are available for all our reporters and investing in the skills they need to take advantage of the tools. It struck me when I worked in newsroom that the audience was often our greatest asset. How often we were trying to find out something that they already knew. And what we had to do was find it out and capture it and organise it and tell it to a larger audience who didn't know. As that X-Files investigator and News Corporation moneymaker Agent Fox Mulder would say, the truth is out there. Part of our journalistic challenge is to find those who know, who have seen the documents, who are party to the conversation, who understand the implications, and get them to tell us what they know. And new, innovative crowdsourcing techniques will see audiences play an increasing role in news gathering, and we will solicit their insights on stories we're investigating. It may mean some trade-offs, but any loss of secrecy in what we're working on may well be made up for by what we gain: a genuine investigative partnership with experts in our audience. For some stories, this kind of partnership will deliver better outcomes and get us the truth sooner. And clearly our way of working is going to change, but what won't change in this partnership is our journalistic responsibilities. We'll still be obliged to check and recheck, to verify, to confirm, to ask extra questions, activities that are at the heart of quality journalism and integral for the ABC for our audience to keep coming back. We can't assume their respect. We must continue to deserve it. Today I've given you some idea of the foundations we're laying for journalism at the ABC in the decade ahead, both in culture and in practice. During a time when news organisations are under such stress, the ABC needs to fulfil the obligation that comes with the liberty of not having to produce a profit. So we're going to meet the expectations of Australians in new ways by providing more immediacy in their news, and by meeting, also in new ways, the nation's perennial need for investigative journalism that takes more time. In journalism, what we do has two main parts: the gathering and the telling. Technologies mostly affect the telling, the way our stories reach people. True, technologies also affect news gathering, as my account of Lateline's origin showed. And nowadays, technology of social media multiplies the way that people can react, making journalism more two-way to everyone's benefit. But in the heart of the gathering, in the thinking through of story ideas, of angles, of patterns, of leads, in the cultivation of sources, the sorting towards an essential, accurate draft of truth, in all that, journalism is people, not technology. And the ABC's confidence is in its people. Our people are our enduring strength. And it is that confidence in ourselves and in each other which enables the ABC to make its enduring contribution to Australian journalism. And that contribution is about to grow. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for that very insightful and illuminating address. Mark has kindly agreed to take some questions from the floor. There are a couple of roving mics. They'll be passed around. If you could please state your name and the organisation that you represent. And if I could have questions first from the working media, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Nick.
Hi Mark, how are you? Nicholas Heraldson.
Yeah, you're print, not broadcasting, Nick, I can tell.
I just wanted to ask, first of all, it would seem to me that perhaps the Australian taxpayer might expect that the funds that you have might be better spent on some of the issues that you mentioned there, and some of those masthead programs like Four Corners, 7:30 Report. Why don't you spend the money investing in those shows more, when I'm sure the staff who work on those programs might actually ask that an increased budget would mean a better quality of journalism?
Yeah, I think that's a very legitimate question, and that's something that we've thought through as an ABC executive, and that's we've thought through at the ABC board level. And of course, if you're the EP of one of those programs, you'd love a bigger budget, just like Paul Ramage would love a bigger budget for The Age, and that is to be expected. We saw with the kinds of savings we made from significant technological changes and changes to our process, some funding that could be made available to create the infrastructure of a news channel. And we felt the real cost of a news channel, though, Nick, comes from the money that we've already spent creating staff locally, nationally and internationally. And we felt for the relatively small additional dollars, we could deliver a news channel of great quality that would provide a service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's a trade-off, but we feel that we have made the right decision to fill in a gap that had emerged in our offering to the Australian people. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, no one was looking or expecting 24-hour news. In a digital environment with 15 to 20 free-to-air channels, it's legitimate that one of those channels be a free-to-air news channel, and no one is in a better position to deliver it than the ABC. And we think that will be gratefully received by the two-thirds of Australian homes, more than two-thirds of Australian homes that have no access to a news channel at all. Yeah.
I would like to hear a little bit more about content, because actually you do already have a 24-hour news channel, and that's News Radio.
Yeah.
And it's not properly financed, and
Yeah.
in the middle of the night it switches to
Yeah.
the BBC.
Yeah.
During the day it switches to Deutsche Welle. So how are you going to arrange that?
And we have all sorts of other constraints around news radio as well, including a legislative constraint that we need to broadcast Parliament, and that's how the channel actually got created. I see increasing opportunities for our news channel and our news team to work closely with the radio division, delivering content. We've already found the experience of News Breakfast is that content created for radio has worked well on television, with putting cameras in the studio. So the Prime Minister is being interviewed by Fran Kelly. That becomes content for television as well as content for radio, and the reach of that content expands significantly. I think some of that will flow back the other way. But we are looking at the resourcing of news radio and how we can properly or expand the level of Australian content in that as part of our thinking through the news operations. The other thing I would say we actually have quite strong support that comes for the breadth of content that is available on news radio. People like the fact that you can get updated Australian bulletins, but you can get the best of Deutsche Welle, or you can get All Things Considered by National Public Radio, or you get some BBC content as well. And part of the feedback we get is do not take away that diversity of broadcasters and views that are made available. But I'd like to be able to do more for news radio as part of these changes, and that's certainly on our agenda.
Good afternoon. Rob Taylor from MFB. About last February, I received some phone calls and emails from colleagues and friends in the UK and USA asking me if I had been involved at all in any of those fires just south of Sydney, which led me to, apart from the journalistic issues in that, led me to the real problem, the one that you're talking about also, is that with the changes in every change in technology centralises the process. How do you see your 24-hour news channel overcoming those challenges?
It's a good question. I think, though, you can argue the opposite. What we are seeing through News Breakfast is that the technology, and I think even through the late line experience, this technology allows you to go to where the story is and be able to deliver it to audiences in different ways. I think what we are foreshadowing around the news channel is a very close link to ABC Local Radio, where we effectively have news staff located at 60 locations around the country. And I think one of the very important things that's happening with the changing of these business models and the fragmentation is the inability for commercial models to hold up in areas that don't have populations of great size, and the pressure that business models are under in regional and rural Australia. So in a sense, the importance of the ABC in regional and rural Australia through local radio, through our newsrooms there, are very important. Technology makes it easier for us to get content back and forth from there, to produce video content there and deliver it back in. We were at an ABC board meeting in Rockhampton, and they were talking about, I think in the 60s, where there was a local 7 o'clock news bulletin that was done for far north Queensland that had been shut down, and we moved to a state-based system. It is going to be far easier in this technology in the future to deliver local video-based news bulletins for communities that don't have them now. So look, I think there is a risk of too much centralisation. There's a risk of thinking that one story and one narrative can fit the entire nation. We will have the opportunity to break out and go local when the story needs it, but we think more local stories will emerge through the network that we're creating that has been the case up until now.
Peter Breuer, member of the Melbourne Press Club. Mark, I wonder if I may ask this question. I understand that the world seems to be changing and we're influenced so much by China. My access to Chinese news is in probably Mandarin on SBS. SBS won't broadcast Chinese news in English. In China, you can listen to Chinese news in English. Can the ABC bring Chinese news, given its economic impact and the economic impact of China, can it bring it to Australian audiences? Because SBS won't.
Well, that's a question I haven't been asked before. You're not from the Australian, are you? They've shown a lot of interest in China and the ABC in recent days. We have no plans to broadcast Chinese news. There is a multicultural broadcaster, a multicultural public broadcaster that now has a news channel dedicated to international news, and I think that's going to be more on their agenda than ours, I think.
Mark, Stephen Main. You talk to a lot of ABC people and they complain about being asked to do more with less, and that they can no longer get poached by 9 or 7 or 10 because their serious journalism budgets have been decimated. Could you make a comment about what many journalists regard as the inexorable downward pressure on the remuneration rates for journalists, and how that applies particularly at the ABC?
As always, an interesting question, Stephen. Look, I think the market for journalism has changed. And I think if you look at actually the spread of ABC salaries, I'm speaking generally, I think there would be some very junior staff at commercial radio or whatever who get paid significantly less than the lowest wage at the ABC, and clearly at the high end, high-profile talent get paid more in commercial land than they get paid at the ABC, and we kind of comfortably fit in the middle of that. Pardon? Now, John, we're not going to... I'm happy to produce the list, John. I mean, John Fane's worried about this television push because he's going to have to dress to radio now because we've put cameras in his studio. He wants a wardrobe allowance now, I understand. Look, I mean, it's clearly a different market out there, Stephen. I think we attempt to be competitive in that marketplace. One of the things we are seeing at this time, though, is that we are still attracting and drawing people to the ABC, paying them less money than is on offer in commercial networks. And there have been some high-profile examples of that in recent times. And that is simply because I think there's an excitement and engagement around the kinds of things that we are doing. I think it's a demanding time in journalism. I think there's a pressure to learn more skills and an opportunity for you to find different ways of telling your stories. But I must say, by and large, the people I speak to, and the word I hear is that most of our people are pretty enthusiastic about taking advantage of those opportunities, and they're keen to learn those new skills. I think for many reporters it gives them more control over their story than they've had in the past, and that all in all it's a positive thing. And we want to make sure we're not putting unreasonable demands on our staff, but I think our staff are embracing the changes pretty well. And I think we have a lot of people who want to work for us. You know, a day does not go by when I'm not personally receiving and our senior news team aren't receiving requests for people who are just wondering what opportunities they might have. And that is not to do with the money we're paying by comparison to elsewhere. I think that's to do with the opportunities that are seen to available at the ABC.
Cliff Field, Melbourne Press Club. I'm a former ABC journalist, and one of the things you just mentioned at the end of your speech was the cooperation between various areas. Now, 20 years ago, I remember news and current affairs. I was in the news section, provided some information to current affairs because Sydney News didn't want to put it on because it was just too close to the bulletin. I got a blast from Sydney because how dare I give it to current affairs when they could have used it in the 7 o'clock news an hour later. I pointed out that we're an organisation, but there was still this empire up there.
Yeah.
Now, that's 25 years ago. I do
Ancient history now, that would never
I know.
happen.
Well, I do trust that this has changed.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear...
Well, I should drag Kate Tawney up here to answer that question, but I won't. Kate Tawney runs our news division. She was the leader of the Asia Pacific News Centre here in Melbourne before she was appointed Director of News about 12 months ago, almost 12 months ago. Look, I think we're working hard on that because in a way, the way I look at it is our audiences view it all as the ABC. And they don't care that it's the television division that's creating Q&A and that there's a current affairs history behind Four Corners and a news history behind news. They just view it all as the ABC. And if we have an audience-centred view rather than a divisional view, then we get far more assiduous in just thinking through what's the best result for the audience right now and what's the best way we can deliver to them. And I think a lot of those histories, a lot of that territoriality, we are systematically, day in, day out, eroding and taking down. And I think our news team under Kate's leadership is fully engaged around engaging all parts, the domestic reporters, the international reporters, those who are working in radio current affairs, those who are working in the 90-second news team and our part of our continuous news desk team to deliver the best result for the audience. I think there has been a very significant cultural change that is underway and still got a way to go. Not always perfect, but I think all in all it's a pretty positive story. Michael Gawinda. Ooh. I'm ready.
It's a simple question.
Yeah, what happened?
Is this working?
Standards are falling. Where's your tie?
I used to be Michael.
I know. You look like an academic.
This is a question that I think in another context I often asked you.
Yeah.
How many journalists are you going to hire for the 24-hour...
We're still working that.
No, I haven't finished.
Okay.
How many journalists are you going to hire for the 24-hour news service?
Yeah.
And how many cadets trainees did the ABC take on this year?
Yeah, I can answer the second one now. We took on 9, and I spoke to them yesterday morning. They're smart and interesting and are ready to run. Still working out the final numbers for the news channel. We have, I think, about 20 positions that we've got advertised at the moment around our continuous news desk and the first recruitment that we're doing around the 24-hour news channel. The final number will be developed once we have the full programming schedule that's in place. The reason we announced it in January, frankly, was that we needed to start advertising and that you couldn't advertise for positions where you couldn't tell people the work they were going to be doing. But the precise additional staffing configuration we're going to work out down the track. But we've got 20 jobs that are open right now for it, and that's the start.
Michael Bodie, the
That's
Australian.
Very news, isn't it? Good. It's top of the hour, mate. Sorry, nothing stops for the news, Michael. We're done.
So, I'm just intrigued about this new channel. Can you rule out, given the efficiencies you're looking for elsewhere, that there'll be no consolidation of News Radio, Radio Australia, or even the Australian network with the 24-hour news channel?
No, we have no plans for any of that. I mean, what we will do, I think, is what a lot of newspapers have done and other media outlets do. We will provide... News content will be generated and be used in different places, and that's already happening now, and we will continue to do that. But there is no plan or thinking to somehow take News Radio and to lose that identity and merge it in under the News Channel. We just think there will be benefits that flow back to News Channel by News Radio by creating the 24-hour News Channel. And we see a distinctiveness about the Radio Australia service. We've talked in the past about internationally having a more integrated Australian broadcasting brand internationally. I think there might be some real benefits from that, but that's got nothing to do with the new news channel.
Anthony Clark, Melbourne Press Club. There are winners and there are losers winners and losers in these scenarios, and obviously this is a great win for anyone who loves journalism and news. The loser is that the ABC will be the only mainstream broadcaster to no longer have a high-definition bandwidth. How are you going to address that problem?
That's a good question. Thanks for that. I mean, we have finite spectrum at the moment, and it's taken me 3.5 years to learn this, that if ever they really want to confuse me, they just say, let's have a briefing on spectrum, and they throw up this incredible coloured chart. and the day is gone. We have enough spectrum at the moment to broadcast 3 standard definition channels and 1 high definition channel, and we were required to broadcast in high definition. So our scenario was this. Not every home that receives digital television can receive high definition at the moment. It's currently about 80%, but it will grow more and more because virtually every set that's being sold now and every set-top box is a high definition one. And we expect when digital fully rolls out, it'll be well over 90% of homes can receive it. So we could have taken, for example, ABC2 off standard definition and put it on high definition, but that would have said that homes that have received ABC2 up until now would not be able to receive it. We thought that was unsatisfactory. This is not great use of high definition spectrum. It's not ideal, but our option was to not do the 24-hour news channel, to wait some years to see if we get some additional spectrum down the track. We've spoken to the government about it. The government is glad we are doing this. I think free-to-air television is glad we're doing this. It's going to be a great boom for the take-up of digital television, but it's not the best use of the spectrum. We've said to the government that we would like to be in a position in the future to be able to put this channel on standard definition and to have more HD spectrum. That's a conversation for down the track. That's part of the digital dividend, but we thought it was the best solution to broadcast on the HD spectrum, and we'll be broadcasting some of this content in HD.
Mark Sherrill Forge from a member of the Melbourne Press Club. Further on to your answer to Peter Breuer regarding the Chinese news in English, being one of our major partners in the economy. Now, I think that there's a lot of interest that we can understand from the culture of Chinese. I saw the Tiananmen Square the other night, which was the story of 20 years ago. But we need up-to-date what is going on in China, what is the culture of China. There are a lot of people in Australia who've never been to China, who have no experience, and as it is a major trading partner, I think this would be an invaluable gap and a responsibility that the ABC ought to cover.
That's why we have a bureau in Beijing. We have 2 reporters and crews that are up there. We've been in Beijing for more than 35 years now, and we have had the longest standing commitment of any Western broadcaster to broadcasting out of China. I think our reporters there have done an outstanding job in recent years, and so that's important to us. We are seeking the landing rights for Australian network into China so we can put Australian content back into China. And look, and I think if people are really interested in broadcasting from China, Chinese broadcasting from China, the Chinese government is being very aggressive in putting CCTV, including the English language service, to make that available around the world. The Chinese government is committed to spending billions on expanding the footprint of CCTV in coming years. And so that's going to be available in Australia, be it through IPTV or subscription television or elsewhere. But our commitment to covering the China story for Australian audiences has been going on for 35 years and remains undiminished now. Yeah, Ian.
Mate, Ian Henderson, ABC TV. Mark, time flies, doesn't it? Coming to the end of one 5-year term, are you keen to saddle up for another one?
Oh, it's still a way to go, Ian. I've still got 18 months or so to go. So we'll see. Somebody said to me once, "You've got one of the great jobs in Australia," and I thought, yes, I have one of the great jobs in Australia. And as I say to people, it is never dull. It's very interesting. It's very engaging. But there's still a lot to be done now, and I'm not thinking too far down the track. But let me know if you're interested. We could job share.
Hi, Adam Joseph, Herald Sun. My question's about the ABC Open project.
Yes.
In your media release last year, you talk about educating Australians in the use of digital media. How would that look?
Yeah, sure. ABC Open, I think those of us who live in the city and have dealt with broadband and lived with broadband for a period of time, it's easy to misunderstand quite what the impact of fast broadband in regional Australia will be. In fact, we had someone who speak to us last year who said the difference between dial-up, the behavioural difference of dial-up, where you'd think, will I go online, won't I go online once or twice a day, compared to having fast broadband available all the time, the behavioural differences are just profound. And some years ago, we launched the ABC Unearthed site, which is a site that Triple J has for unsigned musicians, and we had to really scale back that site to deal with people in regional and rural Australia who only had dial-up. And what the government has recognised is that fast broadband in the bush creates all these opportunities for user-generated content, all these opportunities for communities to take advantage of video and audio, for pictures and text, to use broadband as a different medium to tell their stories. And so what the ABC has been engaged to do is we will recruit producers, basically, of content who will create content from regional areas and make that available on ABC local websites, which are already established. But as importantly, we'll develop training skills and tools, and we will run workshops, and we will train and work with community members as they develop their own content. And that content will be available for the ABC to put on our websites, for them to put on community websites, to go on MySpace or YouTube or Facebook, and it will be available for News Limited newspapers to put on their websites, for Fairfax to put on their rural press websites. And I think there is a great benefit in this era of user-generated content to train the community with the skills so they can tell their own stories in their own way. And so there are both those aspects to it. Our people in regional Australia will be creating content themselves, but they'll be equipping and training the community to do so as well. Again, we're recruiting for this. We have 12 positions that are open at the moment. We're looking for talented web content makers in regional Australia, and the ads are running in the papers at the moment.
Yeah, Mark, your society, Eric Williams from WBAI, Pacifica Radio, New York City. My question to you...
They've travelled a long way to come to this, haven't they?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm also a member of the Press Club. I wanted to ask you this, and that is, the Australian society is changing in a lot of ways, certainly in its racial and ethnic makeup. Will your all-news channel reflect that?
Yeah.
What will it look like?
That's a really good question. I think we are looking at that now as we look to recruit. At times we've said, and I've said this previously, that sometimes I think our Australian network reflects more what modern Australia looks like than sometimes our traditional broadcasts and programs. So we will look, and I think we have an absolute strategy in recruitment to try and look to draw from the broadest pool of people that we can to reflect the diversity and the complexity of modern Australia. And I think we are developing some significant talent in that area. We have a significant program around Indigenous employment that we are looking to develop in coming years as part of our Reconciliation Action Plan. And we would like to have more Indigenous staff working on our news programs. And so this is a strategy that needs to take place over some years. It's certainly something we've discussed at the executive level and the board level. And we're trying to put strategies in place to bring the changes we want to bring.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for coming down from Sydney to join us today. We hope that you'll be able to join us again on the 19th of March at the Quills. I won't hold you to it or put you on the spot, but we'd be delighted if you could join us on that night. Here is a little something to take home and raise a glass to the memory of the day when you get back.
Thank
you very much.
Appreciate that.
Thank Mark Scott.